when you can't go to India and expect India to do something to Indians for because of America, and then have said Indian officer go and enforce law on his cousin who has this scamming operation that he makes a ton of money off of with his cousin. It's just not going to happen. He's just never going to find the guy. That's what he's going to tell the superiors, and then the superiors are going to tell that to Americans. And then America is going to say, well, we make some busts every now and then, and, they'll have some sacrificial busts, like I said earlier, where, some people that didn't pay the local chief of police his tax, get popped, or whatever, something along those lines. And, yeah. And then we all think something's happening when, in fact, nothing's happening. So... sad but true. Sad but true. So, nothing's ever going to happen to those scammers. As long as that corruption's in place and people are making money off the corruption on all levels, which they do, then it's just never gonna change. It's just that simple. It's that simple. That easy to figure out, too. So yeah, gift card Brian, he's today sitting there at home in his single room occupancy thinking how nice it would be to have a companion, and probably called up that lady in Nigeria who needs some money to give her kids, Christmas gifts. Please help me. I don't know. Pretty sad. Pretty sad that people can be that lonely and that manipulated into thinking that, It's crazy. So I wonder what everybody in the lolcow universe is doing this Christmas. Maybe I'll check it out on the old YouTubeage later. Wonder what the old lolcows are doing. Wonder what iDubbbz and Anissa are doing up in Canada. Probably nothing. They probably don't celebrate that pagan, capitalist, consumerist holiday Christmas. The last vestiges of white imperialism. That's probably what they would say. We don't celebrate that white imperialist holiday. And did she fuck his life up? Like, straight up. And that whole Creator Clash thing, like, what's even happening with that? What even happened with that? Did everybody get paid? Does anybody know? I don't know anything. I'm ignorant to it. Last time I saw, there was some issues with paying people and booking fighters and all that. Like I said, I'm kind of new to the whole thing. I put it on as background noise when I'm doing stuff, sort of. So it's all somewhat new to me. It's interesting. It's funny. Like I said, it's like a soap opera, kind of. You don't want to listen to how many people died in Ukraine today or Gaza, then you put on something like that, and it's a lot easier on the ears, At least to me it is. A lot easier on the ears. It's all fluff, it's all bullshit, Hassan Piker zapping his dog, the H3H3 shit. I mean, to a degree, I've always kind of been involved just because the culture war thing. I don't know what side of it I fall on. I mean, I guess I probably do. But, like I've said before, I've always considered myself more of a libertarian. I've always agreed. I want to hear all parties. I want to hear all parties involved. That way, you get a real picture for what's going on when you hear all parties. You got all the information, I think. You limit yourself when you just say, no, I want to listen to only one side, and the other side can burn in hell, You limit yourself when you do shit like that, Doesn't make sense. So I like to think of the whole picture. I like to get the whole picture, that's all I'm saying. And I feel like I do. I try to. Just making our little roofs right now, nothing too crazy. Yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think Hassan Piker zapped his dog? Do you? It looked kind of sus when I watched it. Looked like he did. I'm not saying he did, but just looked like he did. I don't really give a shit about shot collars. I think they're necessary in some dynamics, you know. I don't think just to train your dog to sit in one spot for the whole day as a set piece, I don't think it's cool then, but you know, when it comes to training, some dogs need to be zapped once in a while, you know. Some dogs can get pretty rambunctious, you know. Sometimes it's all they understand is that, or you got like a dog on a farm or something, you know, and they're too far for you to hear them or for them to hear you or whatever to listen to a command. So give them a light shock, not a yelping dog shock. To have them, you know, kind of, you know what's going on and come back. A lot of farms will use them as like borders. You know, they'll put a shock line down under the fence, you know, and then the dogs know when they've gone too far and that kind of thing, you know. So I think in that capacity they're okay to use. Not too insane, but yeah, if you're just using it to zap your dog to stay in one spot for the whole damn stream, that's messed up. That warrants a little explanation. But of course, nothing will ever happen to him. That guy said some crazy shit on the internet, and nothing's ever happened to him, you know. Family connections, real privilege, you know. He's always whining about billionaires and millionaires and shit, but it's like, he's the one that's got that real privilege. You know, the privilege to say whatever you want, get away with it on the internet, is worth something in 2025. It really is. Because freedom of speech isn't an absolute. Plenty of people have been shadow banned, they have been deplatformed or whatever for all sorts of reasons, you know. And I don't think Hassan Piker ever has been, though, and he said stuff that definitely has gotten other people kicked off the internet, you know. So, that being said, it's like, I don't think that's very fair. You know, that's all. That's all. I don't think it's very fair. But, you know, life ain't fair. And the quicker you know that, the better off you are. In my opinion, at least. But yeah, and then he goes to China, and they totally step on his view of socialism and communism. You know, it's like I say about communism. The only fat communists are the 4 or 5 people in charge. Everybody else is skin and bones waiting for their next meal. So, just take that with a grain, you know, take that communism with a grain of salt, I guess, you know. In a perfect world, maybe it would work out, like in a Star Trek universe, you know, in a post-scarcity society where they have the ability to replicate food on demand and replicate materials on demand, would make money worthless. Maybe in maybe in that world, communism could work, but that world's far away from our world. Very far away. And I don't think it's going to come around anytime soon. Because that's how it works in Star Trek. People are always like, oh, it's communism in Star Trek. And it's like, well, it's post-scarcity democratic socialism. Post-scarcity in the way that they have replicators, and replicators transform matter into whatever you want it to be. Thus, for removing the labor factor in a lot of things, you know? So, once you've done that, it's like, well, we removed the labor factor and all these things that we used to have to do. Now what do we do? And it's like, well, now you do whatever you want. And that's where Star Trek gets involved, you know? People do whatever they want in the Star Trek universe, you know? They can choose to do things if they want. You know, Jake Sisko chooses to cook, something I can't imagine, but only because I did it for years for money, and you lose the enjoyment of cooking when you do it in a line setting. That's why there's so much difference between like a chef and a line cook. You know, I've met plenty of chefs in my day, and a lot of them couldn't handle the pressure of the line. You know, they couldn't handle being able to replicate that dish thousands of times, you know. They could make up a dish, they could make fancy dishes, and they could do cool stuff like that, but they just couldn't handle the pressure of, you know, having to do it on an industrial scale for tons of people as quickly as possible. You know, but Jake Sisko didn't. He wanted to cook because he enjoyed to cook, because he had a choice in the matter, because he didn't have to do it to survive, you know. I think once you hit that point, life is a lot better, you know. But you got to get to that post-scarcity society first, where you have the ability to replicate stuff. And in Star Trek, at least the Star Trek of the 24th century iteration, they could do that. So, that being said, things like money became useless to a degree. I mean, they kept money so that they could communicate with other foreign powers, you know, but for the most part, they didn't use money in the Star Trek universe just because they could replicate whatever the fuck they wanted whenever they wanted it, so it didn't make a difference. You know, you just couldn't replicate certain things. You know, you could, like, replicate an 8-ball of cocaine right away, you know, or something like that. You know, because it had, you know, other things in it that made it what it was, beyond food or clothes, you know. You could replicate food because it's just simple, you know, molecules of protein and carbohydrates and stuff, and then they just add some taste to it, so you could easily do that. But other things couldn't be done, so they touch on it in the Star Trek lore, you know. The replicator would be awesome to have, but only because it does certain things. That's all, you know. Still be freaking cool to have. Imagine being able to replicate whatever you wanted within reason, you know. You're like, replicate me a new PlayStation, replicate me a new, you know, whatever, replicate me a new this, replicate me a new that. You could just do that shit all the time. That would be great. I would just be replicating stuff all day if I lived in the Star Trek universe. Just be replicating shit all day long. That's my kid up there screaming at his video game. It's crazy. I need to tell him to relax. It's just a game, bro. Relax, bruh. It's just a game. It's supposed to be Christmas, man. A time of peace and understanding. He's probably up there destroying something. He's 13 years old, so, you know, every game is involved with violence of some manner. You know, some kind of... But at least he's not playing Roblox too much anymore with all the shit I've heard about that place, you know. Makes you wonder how they get away with that. For that one kid went and tracked down a bunch of people on there, and then he ended up getting banned. How crazy is that? Yep. It's the world we live in. Kid does something about P3DOs on the internet and he gets banned. I don't know. So like I said, it's kind of nice that the kid's getting away from the Roblox and stuff. If that's the kind of shit they're letting people get away with. In my opinion, at least. Crazy that they arrested or kicked off that kid, though. When those other people were grooming, I believe, is what they were up to. Children on the game. You know, and then the kid gets busted for exposing them. And I don't know what else was going on in there. I don't know if Roblox had something to do with that, like if they were exposed to for lackadaisical, you know, habits or whatever, you know. Whatever they get up to in those kind of places. But yeah, that kid got banned. And that's messed up. Kids shouldn't be getting banned for tracking down monsters and exposing them. But again, it's the world we live in, right, everybody? So what do you guys think about that thing they found under the pyramids in Egypt? You think that's real? You think there's actually a huge structure underneath the pyramids, and that the pyramids that we know and love today are basically just like the tip of the iceberg? There's there's huge facilities down there, and that the whole Egyptian thing was like a huge power generation plant for an ancient pre-modern human society, or possibly a Tartarian one. What y'all think of that? I don't think that's too far out of the realm of possibility, because, you know, history has been lost many times. There's been many events throughout history, not just history of the West, which is what we tend to focus on because we're Western, you know. But, you know, history in the East has fallen apart more than once. The Arabic history has fallen apart more than once. You know, there's been plenty of hurdles that humanity has had to get over. So I wonder if it's true. The simple fact that Egypt won't let anybody, there's that one doctor, you know, not a doctor, but like a doctor of archaeology, I believe, Egyptology, I would imagine, is in charge over there, and he's kind of an ass about how many people he lets in, and, you know, oh, you want answers? You can get it by reading my book, you know, not by studying the stupid pyramids. Read my book and give me some money. You know, he's like that. So it's like, oh, how much can you trust from that guy? If he's just interested in the money and being the gatekeeper of the place. Seems like that's what's going on to me. And a lot of other people seem to think the same way, so I think there's a lot of stuff that could have happened in the past that they're not telling us today, you know? I don't think that's too far-fetched at all. And really, who can we ask? We have to believe the history we're told. You know, and as soon as you start asking questions outside the box, they call you a lunatic or something, you know? Oh, you're just one of those fucking lunatics that thinks the world